at 4 a.m. local time on Saturday, US President Donald Trump announced on his social media platform Truth Social that his administration had carried out a large-scale strike against Venezuela. Trump said the US military had captured President Nicolas Maduro and his wife and flown the couple out of the country to New York. The ousted president of Venezuela, Nicolas Maduro, later arrived in Brooklyn and will be held on drugs and weapons charges. On Sunday morning, US Secretary of State Marco Rubio went on multiple news outlets to discuss the operation.
It's very simple, okay? In the 21st century, under the Trump administration, we are not going to have a country like Venezuela in our own hemisphere, in the sphere of control and the crossroads for Hezbollah, for Iran, and for every other malign influence in the world. That's just not going to exist.
Now, a lot of people have criticized the operation and questioned the true intent behind the attack. And I find it to be very conflicting for a lot of people, because on the one hand, they are very skeptical about the US's intervention. And the Trump administration certainly doesn't hide the fact that they are interested in Venezuela's oil. But on the other hand, it is also true that the Venezuelan people have finally seen an alternative that is not Nicolas Maduro, whose regime has been accused of electoral fraud, human rights abuses, corruption, and putting the Venezuelan people under severe economic hardship. So I've decided to talk to someone who can help me understand the complexity and the reality in Venezuela.
I live in Spain, so I'm 5 hours ahead of Venezuela. So when all of this happened, which was 2 a.m. Venezuelan time, I was sleeping. It was like 7 a.m. in Spain, and I started to get calls from people inside Spain, friends of mine, but also people from Venezuela. So the first call that I pick up, my friend tells me it's happening. And when Venezuelan says it's happening, we all know what it means. Of course, my first reaction was like, what do you mean it's happening? Like, how is it happening? And he's like, they have the US is bombing Caracas. And our first reaction is like, okay, this is a thing. This is real. And I ask him, okay, but like, is this confirmed? Like, are you seeing videos? This is not a fake video. Someone called you. Why are you calling me? And he says to me, yeah, I just spoke to my mom. They are hearing the bombs.
That's Valentina Aguana, a Venezuelan digital rights activist who's been fighting against Maduro's media censorship since 2019. She monitors internet censorship events and analyzes cyber attacks that target dissidents from the Venezuelan government.
The first thing was checking with our relatives, seeing if they were safe, and checking online and on social media to see what the videos were about. And we realized that it seems, and we realized this very, very quickly, that the attacks seem to be to military targets and areas with very or non-populated areas. We started seeing the videos, and of course, I'm from Caracas too, so I know the city. And seeing the videos, I realized that these were the targets that they were bombing. I spoke to my dad very quickly. He was awake, and he told me, yes, we heard explosions, we are okay. And after the initial shock, and I gotta say, of course, you're scared for the safety of your family, or in general for the safety of everyone. But the first thing we think is, okay, is this really happening? Is this a regime change? Are they taking Maduro or who else? Is this it? And then you get a lot of mixed feelings in general. But in general, the first thing is like being very, very excited. We were actually, and everyone I know, the first feeling is like, okay, this might be a good thing. Everyone I know celebrated at first. And I think that was a general consensus. After you check that your family is okay, people were celebrating. My dad was celebrating when I called him. He was all right. I checked he was safe. They started celebrating at his house.
And here's me asking Valentina whether she thinks that there's gonna be a regime change and what's the situation at the moment.
There has been less than 72 hours, so we are still figuring out what is happening. I think, or in my case, what I believe, for a regime change in Venezuela is not only changing the president. Nicolas Maduro is, well, was the president of Venezuela, not because of democratic voting. I mean, he was not elected in the last election. He lost the election and he sold them. So he is not the rightful president of Venezuela. And therefore, anyone related to Maduro and the Chavismo regime is not someone elected by the Venezuelan people. So when we talk about regime change, just the fact that Maduro and his wife, which is not like his wife has also been from decades part of the system. It's not like a random civilian. She is part of this. Um, the fact that they are both in U.S. custody doesn't mean that the Chavismo or the current political system in Venezuela is going to change. So, although it is a good thing, of course, that someone that has violated human rights is in jail, um, we are also very aware that this is not the end of it, as we may have thought at the beginning of when all this happened, like at 2 a.m. Maybe it's like, okay, it's happening. Maybe it's not it. I don't think the transition, if this is the beginning of the transition, it's not gonna be quick. And at the moment, currently, the president, let's call it like that. Again, these are people that have not been elected by Venezuelans, but it's the ones that are ruling the country, anyways. So the president of Venezuela is Delcy Rodriguez, which is the vice president. And of course, it is the vice president elected by Maduro. So designated by Maduro. We don't vote for the vice president. We just vote for the presidency, and the vice president is elected by the president. So um, in this scenario, it's the same. If the vice president is still, it's now the current president, it's the same system, it's the same regime. We haven't seen any political prisoner being released. And we're talking about it could be almost 1,000 people being in jail in Venezuela for political reasons. No, not one of them has been released after all of this has happened. Uh, so the current situation is that the vice president is now the ruling president, even though it should have followed some sort of process. Like it's usually in Venezuela, if the president, I don't know, dies or something like this happens, the vice president has to go to the general to Congress, has to go to Congress, and in Congress. Um, uh, you do the swear in, hey, and now I'm the president, whatever. This has not happened. This was just like a communication from the the Supreme Justice. Uh, they just say, hey, she's the president now, like doing a whole legal loop that it just does not exist. But again, we need to think of Venezuela as a dictatorship. So in these scenarios, the regime can do whatever, and the regime has its hands in every single part of the government: the judicial system, the electoral system, military, and of course the the Congress.
Now, all of the Venezuelan television channels are controlled by the state, and information unfavorable to the government is never covered. And Valentina has been working tirelessly to ensure information flows into the country without censorship. Does she anticipate any changes to the media landscape going forward?
We were expecting that, especially during the hours of the attacks, those first hours in after 2 a.m. However, we didn't see any increase in censorship in the sense that we were expecting blogs of more social media like Instagram, Facebook, uh, X, formerly Twitter, is already blocked in Venezuela. So you need to use a VPN or use circumvention shell to get in. But we were expecting even WhatsApp or Telegram to be blocked. But that did not happen. One of the things we believe, at least at the moment, is that in the frenzy of all what was happening, they didn't even have the chance to think about this or to give the order to do it. I mean, this is something that they usually do in when they are expecting political unrest. They increase censorship. They have blocked YouTube in the past for situations that are way less important than what happened 2 days ago. So the fact that we didn't see an increase in censorship, we believe it's because they just weren't prepared for it. So they just didn't give the order. Now, for example, TV channels, what we have been seeing is because the first things we also wanted to monitor is what are the government channels talking about while Caracas is being bombed. They were streaming movies, they were streaming travel blogs, and just old content. Nobody was talking about what was happening. And Caracas, even after hours, like 4 ish hours, not a single Venezuelan TV channel was reporting that Caracas was being bombed. It's like nothing was happening. You turn on the TV and you had bombs right by your side, and that was not on TV. And there are two things that were happening. First, government controlled TV channels were waiting for orders to what to say, and those orders weren't coming through. So they just said, okay, I'm not going to say anything because I'm not going to be the one to blame if I said something wrong. And private owned channels, but they're anyways controlled by the government because they can't say anything that offends the government, were too scared to report on what was happening. So on TV, you see nothing. The first thing we see is when the actual official government officials issue statements, and at that point is was when they could report something. But most channels, up until very early in the morning, from 2 a.m. until like 8 a.m. or 9 a.m., they were saying nothing. Like movies, cartoons, anything but that. And now what we are seeing is that now that private owned channels started doing their own reporting, which again, it's just pretty much saying what the government is saying already without giving much opinion on it. One channel just posted or share on a TV on TV one tweet from Donald Trump or post from Donald Trump.
Now, here's me asking Valentina how she looks at criticisms that describe the strikes as unnecessary foreign intervention of US imperialism on social media.
This is for me obvious to say that I wish that Venezuela didn't have to get to reach a point in which the US government had to do something like this. Nobody wants their home city to be bombed, regardless of what happened, which again, it's not like uh, this was an attack to very specific targets. But even then, I don't want my city to be bombed. I don't want my family to be scared of what's happening or hear an helicopter. It's a very traumatizing experience. And also, a lot of these military targets are very close to just housing complex. Uh, Sometimes because the government, the Venezuelan government, wanted them close to military targets. So it's harder to you to hit military targets in case of you also hit civilian infrastructure. So it's scary. Bad things could have happened, uh, which it did not. Which thankfully it did not. In general, public infrastructure in Venezuela, it's okay, and in general, people are okay fiscally. Of course, I don't want the US to bomb Venezuela. And it's very, of course, I am, and now I'm talking to us about my personal opinion. We need to be very aware. I'm skeptical of the intentions of the US government. I do not think that the US government is doing this only because he wants to bring democracy to Venezuela. But also in social media, they are talking about this as if we don't know this. Like, of course I know. Of course Venezuela know. Oh, the US is only talking about oil. Yes, we know. That's what Trump says on its public TV. Like, yes, we know. The US government only cares about their political and economic gain from this. We know. And that thing can also be true alongside the fact that Maduro's government was violating human rights or is violating human rights because, again, at the end, the regime hasn't changed. So, although we wouldn't have wanted to reach this point, I don't know what else could have happened in Venezuela for us Venezuelans to be able to change the regime. We have been trying for decades now. The first massive protest started, I would say, 2002, and then in the when I was still a kid, then in 2007, massive protests from university students broke out, and after that, and this was all during Chavez, and even then, in this past decade, in 2014 with Maduro, we had massive protests all around the country, and people were getting killed by security forces. People were getting arrested by security forces. Same thing in 2017, and again in 2019, eventually to this point last year, well, now 2024, when we did elections, we knew the elections were rigged, and we still went through it just because we wanted to demonstrate that the government was stealing the elections. And we did. We were able to demonstrate it. Even when they controlled the system, we were able, Venezuelans, to create and organize, to create an organization that would allow us to demonstrate the fact that they stole the elections. And after that, they started to increase the number of political prisoners up to, at that point in 2024, 2,000 people, over 2,000 people were arrested. I had personal friends being arrested. Thankfully, they're free now. But there are a lot of people who are still in jail. Again, almost 1,000. So when you try every single system that you can think of, from protest, from voting, there is a point in which you have to say, okay, but how do we do this? We don't have weapons. The military is completely controlled by the government. The judicial system is controlled by the government. So when the international community talks about, oh, but we should be against this, or we think Venezuelan problems should be solved by Venezuelans, I ask them how, or why the international community wasn't there to try to put pressure on the government before all this past decade, so we didn't have to reach a moment or a point in which a US president wants to bomb Venezuela so they can put someone in charge that they can make, business with regarding oil. Where were the international community at that point? Most people were just doing statements that they are with the Venezuelan people, and okay, and then what do we do? And that's the thing that we are reaching this point in the 21st century that we don't know how to deal with new authoritarian regimes. The same is happening in Nicaragua, and the same is happening right now in front of our eyes in El Salvador too. I think these new authoritarian regimes, they're getting more and more powerful, and it's going to reach a point in which the populations can't get out of it themselves. And if the system is too strong, then what do you do? Because again, the international community doesn't want to intervene when it's in the early stages, because before these regimes get a hold of every single thing in the system. And this is a problem that I don't have a solution for. It is a problem. I don't want the US to have to bomb my city in order for a criminal to get out. But then what do we do? What could have done better in the past 10 years, the international community, in order to help Venezuelans? And a lot of people who are against the US military mission in Venezuela were completely silent when we were talking about the political prisoners in Venezuela. They were completely silent when we said that the Venezuelan government had a economic policy that made people starve, because those were not because of the sanctions. It was a decision from the Venezuelan government on how they manage the economy of the country. And also, the international community, a lot of the international community was silent when there were organizations exposing the corruption in the government, saying, hey, the money coming from the oil in Venezuela doesn't go to Venezuelan people. It is a black box. We don't know who controls it. We don't know where that money goes. So when now now suddenly you are you are worried about Venezuelan oil, but in the past 15 years we haven't seen the results of said economic benefits from the oil. So you just don't want the US to have the money, but you don't care if that money is in the hands of criminals who don't give that money to the country. So it is a reflection thing that we need to do, and I don't have a good answer to that. What I'm just gonna say is that the world is very complex, and two things can be true at the same time. You can say that it's bad that the US is bombing another country, while at the same time understanding that the Venezuelan government is one of the worst things that has happened to this country, if not the worst thing that has happened to Venezuela and also Latin America as a whole, because of its influence, and that is a good thing that Maduro is not there anymore, and that it would be a bad thing if the rest of the regime still remains in Venezuela.
At the end of our conversation, I asked whether Valentina is hopeful for the future.
Venezuelans have a real relationship with hope, because I think we have been hoping since so many years. Having said that, I don't think hope is something that you will ever lose. It doesn't matter how long it takes. If we wouldn't have a hope, I think we wouldn't have reached we wouldn't have reached the point that we are right now. We wouldn't have been able to do the elections almost 2 years ago, and we wouldn't have been able to prove that they stole the elections. So even though the future looks very weird and looks very complex, uh, I do have hope that at least this is something different. This is a change. Hopefully, this doesn't mean that the US is just simply gonna accept the rest of the Chavismo officials that remain in the country. And it's like, okay, now these people who are also violating human rights will accept US companies to exploit the oil, to extract oil in Venezuela. So everything's going to be cool because now we just have business with Venezuela and they don't care about human rights. That would be the bad ending, but that would be assuming that that's an ending, which I don't think that's an ending. At the end of the day, if this takes us a few weeks, a few months more, a few years more, we gotta do what we gotta do, because everyone wants to go back to their home country at some point. So I don't think hope is something that we are allowed to lose. We can't lose hope, because we have people in jail that need to be out. That we need to get them out. We have family and members in Venezuela that we want to see before before they pass. And there's a lot of people that would just want to go back to their home. So I don't think you lose hope, no matter what happens. You just keep going. Now, in the next few days, in general, you should be always being kind to people, but like in the next few days, if you talk to a Venezuelan, or you talk about Venezuela, just be kind and think about how complex these things are, but that at the same time, when we're talking about human rights violations and human rights in general, you have to always stand with the victims. So when you talk about Venezuela, or when you talk to a Venezuelan, just be kind. In the past few days, it's gonna be rough, it's gonna be hard. Just think before you post something or before you share something. Just have a bit of empathy in this situation. That's it.